In this video, I will explain the history of the British Empire and how it developed over centuries. We will take a look at the most important events and factors that contributed to Britain becoming the largest colonial power in the world. The British Empire did not emerge overnight, but grew over centuries. It all began in the late 16th century, when England started exploring the seas and seeking trade routes. Queen Elizabeth I supported seafarers like Sir Francis Drake. These early voyages laid the foundation for later conquests and settlements overseas. At the beginning of the 17th century, English settlers founded the first permanent colonies in North America. Jamestown in Virginia was one of the earliest settlements in 1607. Later, the Pilgrims followed with the Plymouth colony in present-day Massachusetts. These colonies were often difficult to establish, marked by hunger and conflicts with indigenous peoples. They sought economic opportunities or religious freedom. Trade was a key driver for the empire. The British East India Company, founded in 1600, played a huge role. It was granted the right to trade with Asia, especially India. Over time, the company gained not only economic but also political and military power in India. It managed vast territories and had its own army. In the late 18th century, conflict arose between Britain and its 13 colonies in North America. The colonists felt unfairly treated, especially due to taxes without political representation. No taxation without representation. This led to the American War of Independence, 1775 to 1783. In the end, the British had to recognize the independence of the United States of America. The British sailor James Cook undertook several major voyages of discovery in the 18th century. On his first voyage, 1768 to 1771, he charted the east coast of Australia and claimed it for Britain in 1770. Initially, Australia was used as a penal colony where convicts were deported. Later, free settlers also arrived, and the land developed into an important colony. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain occupied the Dutch Cape Colony in southern Africa to secure the vital sea route to India. After the war, the Cape Colony officially became British in 1814. This later led to conflicts with the Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, and the native African population. The wars against Napoleon Bonaparte in the early 19th century strengthened Britain's global power. The British Royal Navy won decisive victories, such as the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. While France dominated the European continent, Britain expanded its control over the seas and colonies. After Napoleon's defeat, Britain was the uncontested naval power. After the East India Company controlled India for a long time, the British Crown took direct rule following the Sepoy Rebellion in 1858. India was often called the jewel in the crown of the empire because of its value. The British built railways, telegraph lines, and administrative systems. At the same time, they economically exploited the country and suppressed independence efforts. In 1857, a major uprising against the East India Company's rule broke out in India, known as the Sepoy Rebellion or Indian Mutiny. The trigger was rumors about rifle cartridges, supposedly greased with animal fat, offending the religious sentiments of Hindus and Muslims. Although the rebellion was crushed, it led to the dissolution of the East India Company. The British government took direct control over India. In 1877, Queen Victoria accepted the title Empress of India on the advice of her Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. This was meant to symbolize India's connection to the British Crown and demonstrate British power. For many Indians, however, it was a symbol of foreign domination. Victoria herself never visited India. In the late 19th century, Britain was heavily involved in the scramble for Africa. European powers divided the African continent among themselves, often ignoring existing borders or peoples. Britain secured vast territories, from Egypt in the north to South Africa in the south. The goal was to gain raw materials, trade, and strategic advantages. Cecil Rhodes was an influential figure in British imperialism in South Africa. He became wealthy through diamond and gold mines and dreamed of a British Africa from the Cape to Cairo. He served as Prime Minister of the Cape Colony and founded Rhodesia, today Zimbabwe and Zambia. His policies were often ruthless toward the African population. The Suez Canal, opened in 1869, drastically shortened the sea route from Europe to Asia. It was strategically crucial for the British Empire, especially for the connection to India. Britain gained increasing influence in Egypt and effectively took control in 1882 to secure the canal. Egypt remained formally part of the Ottoman Empire, but was under British rule. Life in the colonies varied greatly depending on who you were and where you lived. British officials, soldiers, and settlers often led privileged lives, separated from the native population. For the locals, colonial rule often meant oppression, economic exploitation, and loss of culture. However, there were also new schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Administering the vast empire was a great challenge. In London, there was the Colonial Office and the India Office. In the colonies themselves, governors represented the British monarch. The administration relied on British officials, but also on local elites who were often persuaded or forced to cooperate. The British Royal Navy was the backbone of the empire. It protected trade routes, enabled troop transports, and ensured control over the world's oceans. With its superiority, Britain could enforce its interests worldwide and defend its colonies. The saying, "Britannia rules the waves," expressed this dominance. Christian missionaries played an important role in the British Empire. They traveled to the colonies to spread Christianity, but also to establish schools and provide medical care. Their motives were often religious, but their work sometimes supported the spread of British culture and rule. Famous missionaries like David Livingstone were also explorers. The colonies were an important source of raw materials for Britain. India provided cotton, tea, and jute. Africa supplied gold, diamonds, cocoa, and palm oil. Other parts of the empire contributed rubber, tin, sugar, and timber. These raw materials were processed in Britain and contributed to the Industrial Revolution and the country's prosperity. The British Empire was heavily involved in the transatlantic slave trade, which deported millions of Africans to America. British traders and plantation owners benefited for centuries. However, in the early 19th century, the movement to abolish slavery grew. In 1807, the slave trade was banned in the empire, and in 1833, slavery itself was abolished, although forced labor often continued. Some settler colonies with predominantly European populations gained increasing self-government over time. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa were called dominions. They were largely independent internally, but recognized the British monarch as head of state and were part of the empire. They supported Britain in the World Wars. In World War I, 1914 to 1918, soldiers from across the British Empire fought alongside Britain. Troops from India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and other colonies made important contributions on various fronts. Although the war temporarily strengthened unity, the heavy losses and war experiences also fostered national awareness in the colonies. Between the First and Second World Wars, demands for independence grew in many parts of the empire. Nationalist movements gained strength, especially in India and Egypt. Britain made some concessions but mostly tried to maintain control. The Great Depression also hit the empire hard. Mahatma Gandhi became the symbol of nonviolent resistance against British rule in India. With methods like civil disobedience, boycotts of British goods, and protest marches, he mobilized millions of Indians. His goal was full independence for India, Swaraj. Gandhi's movement put enormous pressure on the British government. In World War II, 1939 to 1945, Britain again mobilized resources and soldiers from across the empire. However, the war severely weakened Britain economically and militarily. Defeats against Japan in Asia, such as the fall of Singapore in 1942, shook the prestige of British power. After the war, it was clear the old empire could no longer be maintained. After World War II, the decline of the British Empire accelerated. Britain was weakened and could no longer withstand growing independence movements. Additionally, the new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, supported decolonization. In the following decades, most British colonies gained independence, starting with India and Pakistan in 1947. The independence of British India in 1947 was accompanied by a tragic partition. Due to religious tensions between Hindus and Muslims, the country was divided into two states, predominantly Hindu India and predominantly Muslim Pakistan, which then included today's Bangladesh. The partition caused massive refugee flows and violent riots, with hundreds of thousands of deaths. The transition to independence was not always peaceful. In some colonies, armed conflicts and crises erupted. Examples include the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya in the 1950s or the guerrilla war in Malaya. Britain often deployed military forces to suppress uprisings, which further escalated tensions. As the empire declined, the Commonwealth of Nations emerged as a successor organization. It is a voluntary association of Britain and most of its former colonies. The member states are independent countries but cooperate in various areas such as trade, education, and sports, e.g., the Commonwealth Games. The British monarch is the symbolic head of the Commonwealth. The British Empire left a complex legacy. On one hand, it spread the English language, British legal systems, and parliamentary government forms to many parts of the world. On the other hand, it was marked by exploitation, racism, and violence. Arbitrary colonial-era borders still cause conflicts in many former colonies today. Today, Britain maintains diverse relations with its former colonies, mainly within the framework of the Commonwealth. These relationships are often close but also shaped by colonial history. Debates about apologies for colonial injustices, the return of cultural artifacts, and economic reparations frequently arise. The history of the empire continues to influence British identity and foreign policy.